With Halloween coming up, I thought I'd put together a list of good horror films for you to watch. There's been a lot of horror movies released recently and they've all been terrible. No, I haven't seen them all. It's the most uneducated opinion ever. If you're looking for a film with boring characters and lazy jump scares, you've come to the wrong place. I've talked about jump scares before, and don't get me wrong, having 1 or 2 jump scares in a horror movie is useful to keep people on edge. The problem comes with lazy and uncreative filmmakers that just use jump scares every 10 minutes and don't develop any suspense. You need to build tension before your jump scare, like this.
The word offense in the Greek is scandalon, and it refers to the bait of a trap. This is an old Texas rat trap, and I've smashed many a finger on this thing trying to show this message. And when you put the bait on this trigger, that trigger is called the scandalon. That's the offense. And if you reach for the offense to be offended because you are, an animal reaches for it to eat it, but a Christian reaches for the offense because he's hurt.
With this recommendation list, I wanted to avoid the more obvious choices, so while Alien is a fantastic horror movie and one of my favourite films, everyone has already seen it and it would be a really obvious pick. There'd be no point in recommending a film everyone already knows about and most people have already seen. If you haven't seen Alien, then I guess you're a loser! You really should give it a watch. I have just noticed that in saying Alien is great but isn't on the list has sort of put it on the list. I also wanted to have some variety on this list. People have different tolerances to scary films and I wanted to have something for everyone, so don't be surprised if something like Ghostbusters makes it onto the list. Ghostbusters is not on the list. I'm not saying these films are perfect, they're horror movies and mostly low budget ones at that, but we're in a time where most horror movies that come out are complete crap and these are the few that I consider worth watching. So in no particular order we have Trick or Treat, written and directed by the same guy who made Krampus. While I like Krampus a lot more, Trick or Treat is still a fun time and it's the only horror film I can think of that's actually about Halloween.
During the spookiest time of the year, there are a few guidelines all ghosts and goblins should follow. Always stay on sidewalks. Never go to a stranger's house. And never go out alone.
A lot of horror films are set around Halloween or use it as some kind of backdrop, but Trick or Treat fully encompasses everything about Halloween. The story itself works like an anthology, except the smaller stories all happen at the same time and in the same neighbourhood, and as the film moves along, the stories intertwine to reveal a broader picture of what's happening. There's a fair amount of humour to the film and the practical effects of the assorted creatures are fantastic. It's very American in terms of its portrayal of Halloween, so me being British, I felt a slight disconnect with the movie. That said, I still really enjoyed it and since most of my audience are American, you shouldn't find it a problem. It's the only film I've seen that really captures the spirit of Halloween.
Happy Halloween.
Daddy! I'm back from trick-or-treating!
Billy, shh. Please be quiet.
Why?
Because you'll bother the neighbors. Now go watch Charlie Brown, and I'll be in a minute.
Charlie Brown's an asshole!
Billy Wilkins.
Next we have a small English horror film called The Descent, which follows a group of women who go out to explore a cave. The setting, along with great use of darkness and shadows, really give a tight claustrophobic feel. Apart from a few noticeable green screen shots early on, the effects are really well done, and the film on the whole looks really good for such a low budget. It's worth noting that the US release of this film had a different ending where they cut the last minute and a half because it was considered too dark. Who would have thought a horror film would have a dark ending? I don't think the edited ending is any good, so if you're from the United States and want the original ending, you need to get the unrated version. The trailers do give away a bit much. in that they show the major obstacles the characters come up against, so you might want to avoid them in order to enjoy the reveals and the scares a bit more. So next we have The Host from 2013. It's a romantic science fiction film adapted from a novel by renowned writer Stephanie Meyer. Wait, there's been a mistake. Let me just get rid of that crap. So next we have The Host from 2006. It's a South Korean monster film from the same director as Memories of Murder. The CGI of the creature is a bit dated, but it looks good for a 10-year-old film, and it always has a real presence whenever it's on screen. The Host has plenty of action, but it also has some deliberate humour that never sacrifices the bleak tone of the movie. If you're the type of person that loves monster films, you should really give this a watch. Moving on, we now have Pandorum. The film starts with our characters waking up from a deep sleep and suffering from severe memory loss, which I find hard to believe because I can remember being born. Kill me. From there, we get to piece together what happened on the spaceship. The film itself is like a mix of The Descent and the Dead Space games, but if you haven't seen The Descent or Dead Space, you can look at Pandorum like a good version of the Resident Evil movies set in space. They do a really good job of making the ship feel huge and at the same time very isolating. The sets look really good, there's very little CGI, and the Stan Winston studio worked on the practical effects. It turns into a bit of an action film towards the end, but the mystery of the plot keeps the film moving along nicely. I think this film is more intelligent than people give it credit for. Everything is explained within the film, but they don't dumb it down or beat you over the head with explanations. They keep things subtle, but all the information is there. I really enjoyed this film, so if you're into science fiction, you should check it out.
Just want to ask you a couple questions. How are you awake? Hello? Hello?
So here's the thing. Perhaps this film seems really obvious, but I'm always surprised at how many people haven't seen it. It's one of my favourite movies, so I had to put it on the list. And it also has one of my favourite trailers. Yes, I have favourite trailers. With a voiceover that isn't in the film itself.
Mayday. Mayday. Anyone hear me? Over. This is US Station 31. You read me? Found something in the ice. We need some help down here. Can anybody hear me? We found something. We found something. We found something.
It's directed by John Carpenter, who has made lots of other great horror films too. Stan Winston did one of the big effects, with the bulk being done by Rob Bottin, who worked on the original Total Recall, RoboCop, and had some small parts in Star Wars A New Hope. Despite it having some of the best practical effects around, it's a really well directed movie. The pacing and editing is top notch. Sometimes shots linger for a long time, increasing unease and raising the tension. Having watched this every Halloween for years, I'm too familiar with the material to say how scary it is, but the thing I love is that it oozes atmosphere. You get a good sense of the dynamics between the characters, and as suspicion and fear set in, you get to watch as the group tears itself apart. The thing that really sells it is that every single character spends some time off screen, so you never know who's up to something. The score really enhances the mood, being composed by Ennio Morricone, much of which was recently reused in The Hateful Eight. Whatever you're doing this Halloween, make sure you watch The Thing. Now it's time for A Tale of Two Sisters. Another South Korean film, but this time pushing the psychological horror aspects. The story follows the two sisters as they try to adjust to life in their new home at their father's estate. I will say that you really have to be on your toes to follow all the events that unfold. If you don't stay alert, you might get a bit lost. What I liked about this film was how well paced and shot it was. Nearly all of it takes place in one location, but it never gets stale. They do a fantastic job building the suspense, and each scene heightens the tension. The story itself has a certain poetry to it, and it's rare that a horror film is also so beautiful. There's a fair amount of downtime as they develop the characters and stir the plot, but when the scares come, they're thick with tension and done in a way that you never feel safe. Apparently it's the highest grossing Korean horror film of all time, but I'd never heard of it until a month ago when I was doing research for this video. It's hard to talk about this film without spoiling anything. A Tale of Two Sisters is much more than a simple horror story. I think this is a fantastic film and has a lot of value for repeat viewings. The next film is Paranorman. What would a horror list be without a zombie movie? Although it's stop motion animated, this isn't a kids movie. It's a film aimed at young adults and tackles some very grown up themes.
Norman, wait up! I like to be alone. So do I. Let's do it together.
Paranorman plays on a number of horror cliches and turns them on their head. It takes things like zombies and subverts your expectations in a really creative way. There's a touch of sadness and tragedy to the tone, yet the film is really funny.
This is crazy.
Do I look crazy to you?
It was the studio's second film and I can't spot a single flaw in the animation. It's one of my favourite animations and you should give it a watch.
Paranorman.
Next we have The Orphanage. It's about a mother who takes her family back to her childhood home, which used to be a sports centre. Only joking, it was an orphanage. The tone shares some similarities with some of Guillermo del Toro's films, and he also produced the movie. Being a psychological horror, the use of gore is kept to a minimum, but when it does happen, it's violent and shocking. The Orphanage is beautifully directed with a dark atmosphere and a chilling story. If you're the type of person to whine that nothing happened, this isn't the film for you. And no, it's not just scary because there's a kid in part of it. There's nothing inherently scary about kids or dolls or clowns, but that's what's in every other horror movie because that's what the masses want. And why not throw in some lazy jump scares every 5 minutes? That'll stop them from getting bored in the story parts. They look great in the trailer, who cares what the film's like? And it'll give them time to text their friends. Why try to build an atmosphere and compelling characters where you can just use jump scare. I'm sick of it. No one builds a tone. The story's completely flat out when there is tone. Every single film is the same. And that brings us to It Follows, which is one of my favourite horror films to be released in the last few years. An important element to any horror film is the tone, and the tone of It Follows is one of its defining characteristics. Anytime the camera moves, it's at a slow and creeping pace. One of the great things about It Follows is that you rarely feel safe. The shots are composed in a way to always keep you on edge, and it rewards people that pay attention to details in the background. The time period isn't defined. A lot of the locations and furnishings feel antiquated. All of the TV shows they watch are very old, yet they use some new technology in places. Some of the secondary characters never show their face properly. It all works together to give you a strong sense of unease. The score is a strong point to the film, and it has an 80s retro feel to it.
Trick or treat, mister.
What?
Trick or treat, you bald-headed bastard.